What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about Rachel Amber and Life is Strange Double Exposure. Is there a case to be made for her to come back in some way in this game? I want to talk about it in this video. So let me just kind of get the prediction part out of the way in terms of like kind of gut feeling. We'll talk about that, and then I'll try to rationalize, like, let's try to get her into this game, which is kind of a spoiler in and of itself, because if you were to ask me right now, will she return? I would say the odds are not looking so good. I would say the odds are probably no, she would not come back. But I thought about this right before I hit record, so I kind of want to walk myself through it in my head, see what you guys think in the comments. I think there is a way that you could get her in. Now, of course, there's the one idea of, well, it's two different timelines, right? So you have the timeline where you choose, obviously, what happens with Arcadia Bay versus Chloe. There's also the idea that in the game itself, right, as you make decisions with people, that's going to literally impact the other timeline. Now, whether they literally mesh those two ideas together or not, we don't really know, right? Like, will they emphasize the almost origin story of Max, right? The origin story, say, of Life is Strange. Will they actually emphasize that in any way in the other timeline? And the answer is we don't really know. It doesn't seem like it, but they've been secretive about a lot of the, I think, more of those cryptic things, right? The things you probably don't want to know, as you're going into the game. Rightfully so, they're not really talking about them. But that's just something to kind of keep in your head, really, for the next like 2 months, where it's like it's always something I'm wondering. Where if you choose, say, Chloe, right, and you have Chloe, do you do anything with that? Of course, many people want to know that. But then also, how much do you emphasize the opposite choice, say saving Arcadia Bay and Chloe being dead? Do you emphasize that at all, a little, a lot, in the other timeline, right? So that's the first kind of concept. Now, okay, well, how does that tie to Rachel Amber? Well, in either of those, she's still dead, right? A thing to also remember that I like to throw in, we've talked about this before in a live stream, what's very interesting, and I actually kind of forgot about this until I replayed it just recently. If you recall, in episode 4, I believe, right? Episode 4, I guess in the beginning. So you make the decision to save William, right? And, you see Chloe, you're going through that whole arc, which ends with, you having to choose whether to take her out or not take her out, right? In that timeline, even in that timeline, Rachel Amber is still dead. I actually really like that, but, obviously we'll still expand that in a second. But I really like that because it kind of goes into this theme of, like, she is so mysterious and we don't really know her connection to the storm or, what's going on. And I really like how powerful that can be. But she is so different and so, I don't know, like thematically out there that even in this alternate timeline where you went back to where they were like, 12 or 13 years old, and you changed the next 5-6 years, right? Like that's what you did in that saving William thing. Even doing all of that, Rachel still dies, no matter what, right? Like Jefferson still gets her, or I guess Nathan still gets her. So that's just interesting where for those that say, okay, well, maybe she is alive, one of the timelines. Well, number one, if you choose Arcadia Bay versus Chloe, doesn't matter. She's still dead. She died months before then, right? So that's something to remember. But also, it feels like almost bigger than that. And I think that's kind of the hint that Don't Nod gave us back in episode 4 of Life is Strange 1, where she was almost like destined to die. And whether you want to connect that to the tornado or not, whatever you want to do in your own canon and lore, but it almost feels like it needed to happen, okay? Now, how could you get her into this game if you wanted to? Okay, I have an idea. Let's see if I can actually translate into words and have you guys walk through it with me. The only way I see it happening is actually if they get too deep in terms of those mysteries of Life is Strange. So let me explain. Honestly, I don't want this to happen because, as I just said, I like the mysterious elements of these games. And it's not just Life is Strange 1. They've done it canonically all the time, whether it's Deck 9 or Don't Nod. One of the unspoken rules is, like, you don't really discuss where these powers come from. Like, a lot of those things are just, you make them up in your own head. And I actually think that's very, very powerful. And it originated in 1. You know what I mean? Like, is it because it was Chloe herself that Max was able to do it? Was it just, like, fate? Was it, what was it? Her reaching her hand out and just being able to, and literally in that moment, right? Like, what caused that? I ask it as a question, but I don't ever want to know. I truly do not ever want to know, and I really don't want to know now either for double exposure in terms of how she gets her powers back. I don't want / need to know how the powers actually work. The only thing I've talked about, right, is I think she needs to have a reason for using the powers because she knows how bad it can go. She needs to be almost forced into using her powers. That's what I've always said. But in terms of like how she gets those powers, don't care. I don't care actually. You can give her powers, and that's totally cool because that part doesn't need to be explained to me. Okay, keep following me through here, right? So now you can expand this, right? Because it's more than just her, rewinding time to stop Chloe. Let's take, for example, the classic line from Chloe talking about, like, is this Rachel's storm? Is this our storm? I guess what I'm getting at is the only way I think you could bring Rachel back is if you kind of almost break this fourth wall type thing and you bring Rachel in almost as like this interdimensional being. And you actually have, for the first time ever, a conversation between Max and Rachel. Now, the reason I say this, right, is because Rachel has always been so mysterious. Even Deck Nine's own game, right, and Before the Storm, it's hinted that maybe she does actually have, like, elemental, when she screams and, like, did she start the forest fire and all these kind of things. Again, like, I don't need to know. I actually think it's very cool if she does. I think it's very cool if she doesn't, right? But there is something mysterious about her. The fact that the doe, the more, like, polarized, kind of being, like, in between dimensions or realities in the first game, that being her spirit animal, and then Max's spirit animal also being the doe. Remember, one of my classic theories that I wish was true is that Max and Rachel are actually the same person, and that Max kind of comes in as Rachel disappears. I like that idea. I kind of wanted them to mess with that in the first game, and they never did it. But they did canonically keep it where Rachel is weird. Like, Rachel is also different, and she doesn't canonically have powers, but, it's definitely possible that she could have something. The way I see it is if you bring those two together kind of as like an exposition dump. I guess boiling it down, the way to get them back, Rachel back, but Max and Rachel to talk to each other would be some sort of exposition dump where Rachel kind of just leaves it all on the table, talks to Max about the storm, in the first game, talks to her about what's going on now, and basically how, like, these powers are tied to these, like, nature, impact type things. Would that be cool to see? In a way, yes. In a way, it would be very cool. But also, in a way, I don't really ever need it to happen, right? Because I just feel like and here's another part, because here's what some people might be saying, right? It's like Rachel and Chloe, not Rachel and Max. The only reason Rachel and Max are really linked is, like I said, it always felt like Max was kind of coming in as a replacement. People said, in terms of the clothes, like they thought she was Rachel the first couple times, right? So it's like almost a replacement, the doe thing, all that jazz. That's what connects them. The powers, the maybe powers, the connection to the storm. The biggest connection Max and Rachel has is to that storm. And that's only if you believe that Rachel caused it, right? And that Max is maybe part of that destiny to stop it, / let it hit, / whatever might happen. That is their biggest bond. And so, like, you could do something there where they talk. Now, I also want to throw in one quick thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't read the comics and everybody says I should, and I probably should do it. But is in the comics Rachel alive, I think, in a different timeline, and I know they are using some of the timelines or some of the comic stuff in this new game. Like, it seems very inspired by some of that stuff. That could be the easy kind of cop-out answer where it's like, well, if she's alive in a comic, then she could be alive. Here's the thing. She might be alive in a different universe, but I also, as I said, I feel like my beginning part kind of takes care of that. I don't know if I actually like that. So if that is true, or maybe I'm just kind of making it up in my head, but I don't know. I like the idea that no matter what happens in all of the different timelines, Rachel still dies. And that's kind of like an anchor, if you want to use like Deadpool, Wolverine, right? That's like an anchoring kind of event where that's going to happen no matter what. It's a catalyst for, future things that happen. I like that stuff. I don't know if I ever actually need her. I mean, it's sad, I guess, because it's a tragedy, it kind of happens to her, knowing her story and whatnot, but it's so important. I feel like you don't really need her to be alive in other universes. So that's kind of my take on it. Is it possible she's alive in one of these things? But here's the thing. She might be alive in timeline like 215, right? Out of a million, she's alive in timeline 215. Is that timeline the second timeline that's being explored in double exposure? That's also the issue, right? Like, she might be alive in one timeline, but if Max is only choosing between two, and also if that second timeline is the opposite ending choice of Life is Strange 1, she's still dead. So, like, they might not even touch it, right? Because it's not the timeline where she lives. She lives in some foreign timeline that's never really been discussed before. So that's something also to kind of remember, right? Like, she could still one day come back. She could still technically be alive in a different like multiverse, but just not the one that Max is going back and forth with, in this game. So again, like, would I want it to happen? Yes, but I feel if Max and Rachel are going to talk, I feel like it kind of has to be talking about the powers and about the impact of the powers and how nature is impacted and these kind of like world events go on. And I don't know if I need that, because then now you're explaining it to me. Now you're telling me, okay, well, when you do this, this causes that. Was the storm even caused by Max doing those powers? Was it saving Chloe in general? Was it constantly defying fate? Was it always going to hit no matter what? Like those kind of things, I think those are interesting to just think about. And I don't need to be told that in the game. And up until this point, we've never been told those things, right? Life is Strange 1, 2, Before the Storm, a double exposure maybe, and True Colors. They've never told us those kind of answers, and I don't need those answers answered in general. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.